The sun hung high above the town, beating down with unrelenting force, casting the dirt streets in a yellow haze. The dry air burned in my lungs, scraping the back of my throat as I walked toward the center of town, my feet bare and cracked. From the endless miles of travel scraped against the ground with each step, leaving faint imprints in the dust behind me. I held my brother tightly to my chest, his tiny body pressing against me, a soft, fragile weight in my arms. We had come a long way, but there was nowhere left to go. Not for me, not for him. The town was quiet. The kind of silence that made you feel exposed, like a single step could shatter everything around you. I could hear the clink of coins, the shuffling of boots, and the murmur of voices as they filled. The dusty air, but it was all distant, muffled. The people here, they didn't look at me, not really. They looked past me as though I wasn't even there, as though I was nothing more than a shadow. They had no interest in it. It felt like the whole world had turned its back on me. I stood at the edge of the crowd, cradling my brother in my arms, feeling the weight of his tiny body against mine. He was too young to understand, too young to know what was happening, but I could feel his heart beating softly against my chest, like the only thing that still tethered me to this earth. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on to him. I wasn't sure if I wanted to anymore. Next, the auctioneer's voice cut through the silence, sharp and final. I looked up, my heart pounding in my chest. The world felt too big too, overwhelming, and I could hardly bear to look at the people around me, their faces empty, eyes cold. I was nothing to them, just another orphan, another lost soul that could be sold to the highest bidder. My family was gone. My home was gone. Now here I was, alone, waiting for someone to take me. The first bid was low. A few coins dropped into a tin cup. The sound of it echoed in my ears, reverberating with the finality of it all. It didn't matter. I knew what was coming. I clutched my brother tighter, pulling him closer to me as though that could somehow protect him from what was to come, but I knew better. There was no protection in this world, not for people like us. Who's going to take her? The auctioneer called again, louder this time, his voice filled with an unsettling kind of energy. The crowd stirred, glancing around, but no one made a move. No one cared. Not really. My brother stirred in my arms, his tiny fingers curling against my skin. I closed my eyes for a moment, a brief escape from the reality of it all. But when I opened them again, I found myself staring into the eyes of a man who had stepped forward just a little too late, but there nonetheless. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat, but there was something in the way he moved, in the way he stood, that made my pulse quicken. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't like the townsfolk who stood in judgment, indifferent to everything. He had a look about him quiet, hard, like he had seen too much of this world's cruelty to care anymore. He said nothing, just placed a few coins on the counter with a smooth, deliberate motion. His eyes flicked toward me for a moment, but it wasn't a look of sympathy. It was something else, something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was just another transaction for him, just another soul to take in. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I wanted. But as the auctioneer closed the deal and the crowd began to disperse, I felt a hollow ache in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to scream, to run away, to find somewhere where I wouldn't feel this weight pressing down on me, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not with my brother in my arms. The man turned, walking toward the edge of town without a single word. I followed him, my heart beating loudly in my chest, as though every step was dragging me closer to some fate I couldn't control. Asterisk, asterisk, the man didn't speak to me. He didn't say a word as we left the town behind, the crowd's murmurs still ringing in my ears. I could feel the weight of their gazes on my back, but I didn't dare look back. I was afraid if I did, I might see the truth in their eyes. Coldness, the judgment, the pity, instead. I focused on the rhythm of the man's steps ahead of me, the dust rising with each footfall. He walked with a purpose, like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to lose. His boots kicked up little puffs of dirt, marking the earth in a way that felt ... permanent, unmovable. I felt small in his presence, like a shadow trailing. Behind him, a part of his world but never quite belonging in it. The sun was still high, but the land had started to stretch out before us, barren and open. Nothing but the earth and sky for miles in every direction. There was a silence between us, thick and suffocating. And though I wanted to ask where we were going, what would happen next, I kept quiet. He didn't seem like the kind of man who wanted to be disturbed, and I didn't know if I could trust my voice. We traveled for what felt like hours, the road ahead winding and the heat clinging to everything, even the air. By the time we reached a creek, my legs were sore and my throat burned with thirst. The man stopped without warning, dismounting from his horse. He led it to the water, and I watched him from a distance, unsure whether to approach or stay hidden. Behind the trees lining the creek's edge, it was then that I realized how little I knew about this man. Who was he, really? He was a stranger, and I was in his care, his possession, really. The idea of being in someone's hands like this unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I'd had enough of strangers. I'd had enough of being traded, sold, bartered like cattle. What if he wasn't kind? What if he was like the others who had used me, taken me, and left me feeling like I was nothing more than an object? But he hadn't said anything. He hadn't even looked at me until now. His hand reached for the reins, his broad fingers curling around the leather, the muscles in his forearm flexing with the motion. His face was mostly hidden beneath his hat, but there was something about the way he held himself, the weight of his posture, that made me feel like I shouldn't ask questions, like I shouldn't know more than I needed to. I stood there watching him, watching the way the water moved in the creek, the sound of it, trickling over rocks almost hypnotic. And then finally, he turned and looked at me. His eyes were darker than I expected, stormy, as if there was something inside him that hadn't seen light in a long time, something painful. "You thirsty?" he asked, his voice rough like he hadn't used it in days. I didn't answer immediately, too caught up in the way his voice seemed to echo in the empty space around us. I swallowed hard, feeling the dryness in my throat. "Yes," I whispered, my voice betraying me with its faint tremor. Without another word, he motioned for me to come closer. I hesitated, but only for a moment. I was thirsty. And the way he had asked, so bluntly, with no expectation of gratitude, it made me feel like I didn't have to owe him anything for a simple kindness. When I reached the creek's edge, I knelt beside him, the cool water reflecting the dimming light of the late afternoon. He handed me the canteen, the metal rough against my fingers. I brought it to my lips, and the cold water rushed down my throat in a way that made me feel alive again. My heartbeat slowed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe deeply, without the weight of fear pressing against my chest. "How old are you?" His question was casual, as though he was asking about the weather. But there was something in his tone that made it feel like a burden. 14, I answered, without hesitation. The words felt hollow coming from my lips, as though I hadn't truly lived that long. 14 felt like nothing, like it hadn't mattered, like it was just a number to mark time. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched me, his eyes not quite meeting mine, as if something inside him was wrestling with the truth of what he was hearing. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, almost uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to fill it. The man was a stranger, and the world we were in was as foreign to me as the stars above. But the longer we sat there, the more I realized that this was no ordinary man. There was something buried deep in him, something he hadn't shown, something he had locked away long ago. I could see it now, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched when he thought I wasn't watching. He wasn't just another buyer, wasn't just another man who had come to claim me. No, there was something more to him. I wasn't sure what, but I felt it. "You're safe here," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Safe, the word, hung in the air, heavy and strange, like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The night came swiftly, the horizon swallowed by a blanket of dark clouds. The air, once oppressive with heat, grew thick and heavy, as though the earth was holding its breath. I could feel it before I saw it to change. The wind picked up, tugging at the loose strands of my hair, throwing dust in my face. I squinted against the biting gusts, but it was clear enough to see that a storm was coming, a real one. The man who still hadn't told me his name was already preparing the horses. For the night, he moved with a practiced ease, his hands working swiftly. But his gaze was focused elsewhere, as if the storm in the sky mirrored the one inside him. He didn't speak, but there was a restlessness to his movements, a tension in the way his body coiled like a spring. I stood where I was, watching him. I wanted to ask questions to many questions, but I knew better than to break the silence. Not yet. The storm broke not long after, the first crack of thunder shaking the air, and then the rain poured down, sharp and cold. I took a step back, instinctively looking for shelter. But the man gestured toward the small cabin behind him, an old structure barely standing against the weight of the years. The wood was warped, the roof sagging, but it would do. I moved toward it, my legs stiffed from the long ride, and the man followed close behind. Inside the cabin, it smelled of dust and old wood. There were no comforts, here no warm hearth, no soft bed. Just the bare essentials, a bedroll on the floor, a wooden table with a single chair, and a few crates stacked in the corner. The storm howled outside, rattling the walls, but it felt oddly safe in here, like the world outside had faded away. I settled down on the floor, my back against the wall, holding my brother close to my chest. The baby had fallen asleep on the ride, his tiny body warm against mine. I watched him for a long while, tracing the soft curve of his face, the way his eyelashes fluttered with each breath. The man, standing by the door, removed his hat and set it down on the table. He didn't sit at first. Instead, he stood, staring out at the storm through the small window, his arms folded across his chest. His posture was tense, as though he was bracing himself against something invisible. For a moment, he was just a silhouette in the darkened cabin, a shadow against the violent storm outside. The rain pounded against the roof, a constant roar, and the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. "You'll be safe here," he said finally, his voice low, the words carrying weight, as if he had said them to himself more than to me. There was a finality to it, like he was trying to convince himself that this, whatever this was the right thing. I didn't answer him. The storm outside was loud, but the silence in the room was louder, filling the space between us. His words weren't a promise. Not really. They were just words. I had heard them before, too many times in too many places. You'll be safe. Here, people had told me. And each time, the safety had turned to dust in my hands. But there was something different about him. Even with the uncertainty, even with the weight of my past pressing down on me, I didn't feel the same unease that had followed me through every other place I had been. It was as if there was a part of him deep inside that understood, that carried the same weight I did. I didn't look at him directly, but I could feel his presence in the room with me. It was heavier now, more real. I didn't know what to make of it. I had been alone for so long, had learned how to fend for myself in a world that offered no quarter, no kindness. But this was different. He sat across from me, finally, breaking the tension in the air. He didn't speak again, but his eyes, dark and thoughtful, met mine. And for a brief moment, I could see the storm in him, the same kind of wildness that had consumed me for so long. It wasn't the storm outside that I feared, it was the storm inside of us. The storm that threatened to break everything apart. But the longer I sat there, the more I began to feel that there was something else too. Something quieter, something that might just hold everything together. I turned my gaze back to my brother, watching his small chest rise and fall with each breath. I gently rocked him, soothing him in the way I had learned to soothe myself. It was a silent promise I made. To him every day, "You've got a name?" I asked him, breaking the silence between us for the first time since we had arrived. He didn't answer at first, and I wasn't sure if he even had a name for me to ask about. "Lucas," he said finally, his voice soft, barely above a whisper. But it hung in the air like it mattered. It's like it meant something. I nodded. Lucas. It was all I had, but it felt enough for now. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, the air felt different. A little softer. The weight of the past still pressed heavily on me, but for the first time, in a long time. I didn't feel like I was carrying it alone. It was a strange, fleeting thing, but it was enough. Enough to make me wonder if I could survive this. Enough to make me believe, for just a moment, that there was still something left worth fighting for. The storm raged for the better part of the night. The wind howling like a living thing, the rain slashing against the cabin as if it wanted to tear it apart. I lay awake on the floor, my brother curled beside me, the small warmth of his body, a constant reminder of what I was fighting for. Lucas, on the other side of the room, was silent, his form barely visible in the dim light from the hearth. The fire, now reduced to glowing embers, cast faint shadows against the walls. Flickering like ghosts, the tension between us was palpable, but not the kind that could be easily named. It wasn't hostility or malice. It was something more like the quiet awareness that we were both existing in a space that didn't quite belong to either of us. It's a space that neither of us knew how to claim. We were in this strange limbo, connected by circumstance, but not yet by trust. It's not yet by anything more than survival. I couldn't stop thinking about the look he had given me when he told me I was safe. It echoed in my mind, over and over again. Safe. What did that word even mean? Could I believe it? Was it a lie I had heard 100 times before? As the hours passed, I grew restless. Every shift of the wind outside, every groan of the wooden beams, felt amplified in the silence of the cabin. I couldn't sleep, not with so many questions weighing down on me, not with so much uncertainty hanging between us. I finally sat up, pulling my brother closer to my chest. His small face scrunched up slightly, but he stayed asleep, unaware of the storm within me. I couldn't help but glance toward Lucas. He was sitting near the hearth, his back to me, his elbows resting on his knees. Staring at the dying fire, he looked so still, so closed off, like a man who had been carrying the world on his shoulders for far too long. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. What was there to say anyway? I didn't know him. I barely knew myself anymore, let alone what kind of man would take in a stranger without a second thought. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy until I could no longer stand it. I rose to my feet, my legs aching from the long day's ride. I moved to the fire, closer to where Lucas sat. He didn't look up at first, and I wondered if he even realized I was there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low. It's almost drowned out by the storm. I'm not used to having anyone around. His words surprised me. I had been expecting a cold silence, but instead, there was something raw in his voice, of vulnerability. I hadn't expected to find in this man who had seemed so unyielding. I don't need much, I replied quietly, my voice barely above. A whisper, just a place to be. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like ages. There was a flicker in them, something I couldn't quite place, but it wasn't the coldness I had seen when we first met. It was something softer and understanding, maybe. Or perhaps it was just fatigue. The weight of his own burdens pressing down on him too heavily to carry alone. The fire crackled, and the storm outside rumbled in the distance. But for a moment there was only two people bound by loss, by circumstance, by a need for something that neither of us could name. It was strange.
Ow.
The way our presence seemed to fill the room, to bridge the gap between us without a word. There was no grand gesture, no overture of comfort, just a quiet understanding that we were both in the same place, and that for the first time, we weren't alone. But the tension still lingered. Like the storm outside that refused to let up, it was in the way Lucas wouldn't quite meet my eyes. As though there was something he couldn't share, something too heavy to carry. It was in the way I couldn't bring myself to ask him what his story was, afraid that it might be too much to hear, too much to bear. Instead, we stayed in that silence, each of us holding our own story in the quiet corners of the room.
I'm on.
Raced with thoughts of what came next. What would he expect from me? What was he hoping for? Taking in someone like me? After a long pause, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The movement startled me, and for a moment, I thought he might leave. But he didn't. He grabbed a small bundle from the corner of blanket stand, tossed it toward me. "It's not much," he said, his voice softer than before, "but you can use it for the night." I caught the blanket and stared at it, feeling the weight of his gesture. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to say thank you, but the words felt foreign on my tongue. Instead, I just nodded, wrapping it around myself as I sat back down on the floor. The warmth from the blanket felt good against my skin, but there was still a chill in the air, a chill that hadn't left. "You can sleep by the fire," he added, his voice almost hesitant now. I glanced up at him, trying to gauge his meaning. Was he offering me the comfort of the fire, or was it something more? Something like an invitation to ease the distance between us, just for a moment. But before I could respond, he turned away, moving back toward the corner where he had been sitting. And just like that, the space between us grew again. The distance unspoken, but clear. The fire crackled softly, and I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the weight of everything that had brought me here. The storm outside had finally begun to subside, but the storm inside me was far from over. The night passed quietly after that, the storm subsiding into a soft, steady drizzle. The fire in the hearth had long since died down, leaving behind only a faint glow, casting long shadows on the walls of the small cabin. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, and for the first time since I had arrived, I felt a faint stir of something like peace in the pit of my stomach. But peace was a fleeting thing in my world. It never lasted long. And as the morning light crept in through the cracks in the cabin's walls, I realized that this quiet was just another kind of tension. I woke up to the sound of the wind still rustling outside, but the rain had stopped, leaving behind a cool mist that clung to everything. My brother was still asleep beside me, his small form curled tightly against me. I gently moved him, careful not to wake him, and sat up, my body stiff from the long hours spent on the floor. Lucas was already up. I could hear the quiet sound of him moving around the cabin, his boots tapping softly against the floor, the creak of wood as he adjusted something. He didn't speak, and neither did I. The silence felt familiar, but it also felt like a wall between us, one that neither of us had the courage to break. I stood up slowly, stretching my arms above my head, feeling the muscles in my back protest. As I moved toward the fire pit, I caught a glimpse of him, a rare moment when his gaze met mine. It was like a crack in the wall, an opening in the silence. But before I could say anything, before I could make sense of it, he looked away, focusing. Back on the small task he was engaged in, I felt a strange ache in my chest, the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't just the past that lingered, it was this unspoken distance between us, this thing that kept us apart. Done what no one else had done. He had given me shelter. He had kept us safe for the night. But what did that mean? For a brief moment, I thought of asking him again about his past, about why he was so quiet, about why he carried himself the way he did. But the words stuck in my throat. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear the answer. I wasn't sure if I could bear to know how much he had lost. Instead, I focused on the small task of gathering the blankets, folding them neatly. I had no other role to play in this strange little world we had created, so I busied myself with the simplest things, hoping the quiet would cover the growing tension between us. After a while, Lucas spoke, his voice breaking the silence like a sharp crack in the stillness. "You hungry?" The question caught me off guard. I had been so lost in my own thoughts and the quiet ache inside that I hadn't even noticed the gnawing hunger in my stomach. It was a strange thing, how hunger could suddenly bring you back to life, back to the moment. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and watched as he moved to the small campfire he had started outside the cabin. He didn't ask me to help. He didn't offer me much, just a simple gesture, a quiet invitation to sit and share what little we had. He had set up a small pot over the fire, the scent of coffee already beginning to waft through the air. I took a seat on the log beside him, my hand still trembling slightly as I settled in. The fire crackled softly, its warmth seeping into my bones. I could feel the heat on my skin, and for a moment it almost felt like the storm had never come, like everything that had happened before this. It was just a bad dream. Lucas didn't speak as he poured the coffee, his movements careful, measured. He handed me the cup, his fingers brushing against mine as he did, and I couldn't help but notice the slight hesitation in his touch. The way his eyes flicked up to meet mine before quickly averting. It was the first time I had really looked at him since we had arrived here together. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. A quiet sadness, a wariness that mirrored my own. I didn't know if it was grief or something older, something buried deep beneath the surface. But whatever it was, I could see it there, in the way he moved, in the way his lips pressed into a thin line, as if he was constantly trying to keep something locked away. I took the coffee from him, holding it with both hands, feeling its warmth seep through my fingers. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. It was the only thing between us, the only thread that connected us in this silence. For a long time we sat there, drinking the coffee, the air thick with unspoken words. I couldn't bring myself to say what I was thinking. I didn't even know. What I was thinking was still trying to figure out who this man was, who I was in this place, in this life that had been forced upon me. And in that silence, I realized something that I hadn't allowed myself to understand before. I wasn't alone. Not really. Not anymore. Lucas didn't have to say anything. His quiet presence, the way he shared this small moment with me, his unspoken understanding, it was enough. The fire between us wasn't a roaring flame. It was a small, quiet thing. But it was there. And in that moment, it was the only thing that mattered. The days after the storm had passed were quiet, almost too quiet, as if the world outside had stopped, waiting. The cabin had become our world, a fragile, makeshift home in the vast wilderness that surrounded us. I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the days, the slow, steady movements that marked our survival. Each morning, Lucas would tend to the horses, checking their saddles and reins, and I would watch, quietly, from the door of the cabin. There was something almost comforting in the way he moved, like he was used to the solitude, like he had always lived this way. I still hadn't asked him about his past, about why he lived alone in this cabin in the middle of nowhere. Part of me was afraid to know. I was afraid it would be just another story of loss, of survival, of someone who had given up everything to become a shadow of himself. But the longer I stayed there, the more I began to realize that the silence between us was both a shield and a wall. We were two people in need of something beyond mere survival, but neither of us could yet bring ourselves to say what it was. On the fourth day, I woke early, as I always did, and found Lucas standing outside by the horses, staring at the sky, his shoulders rigid under the weight of whatever thoughts he carried. The morning air was crisp, the kind of cold that cut straight to the bone, but I didn't mind it. It felt like a fresh start, a clean slate. I hadn't known how badly I needed that until now. The baby was still asleep inside the cabin, but I had learned to be quick about my tasks. I wasn't a burden to Lucas Snout in the way I had felt in other places. He didn't act like I was. He didn't need anything from me except my presence. And in that, I realized something else he was. Waiting for me? He was waiting for me to stop hiding, to stop pretending that I didn't see the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way his eyes softened whenever I spoke. The way his body seemed to relax around me, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever it was that was building between us. I didn't know how to name it, didn't know what it meant. Lucas turned when he saw me approach, his eyes briefly meeting mine before quickly looking away. He wasn't one to let his emotions show. I could tell that much. "I'm leaving today," he said, his voice firm but without emotion. My heart skipped a beat, the words catching me off guard. For a moment I thought I hadn't heard him correctly, or that I was misinterpreting the stillness in his voice. "Leaving?" I echoed, as if saying the word aloud would make more sense of it. He nodded, his jaw tight. "I've got work to do."
Oh.
"Things I've been putting off?" The air between us felt thick again, and the silence stretched. wide. I'm so wide out. I'm all wild. Why am I wide? I had known, deep down, that this moment would come. It was inevitable, wasn't it? No one stayed in one place forever. Not when the world was as unforgiving as it was. Not when people like us had learned to keep moving, keep surviving. For a moment, the thought of him leaving, of being alone again, stirred something in me that I wasn't ready to face. I had grown used to the quiet presence of his being here, even if we hadn't spoken much. The cabin felt like a home, in a way, because of him. I wasn't sure what to do with that feeling, but I knew it was real. I didn't want to ask him why. He was leaving. I didn't want to know the reasons. But I couldn't stop myself from speaking the question that was lingering in my mind. Where will you go? He looked at me, his face unreadable. Back to where I came from. I didn't ask more. I couldn't. It wasn't my place to ask, not yet. There was too much silence between us, too much distance. The horses were ready, saddled, and waiting. I didn't know how long it had been since we had last spoken this much, but I felt the weight of it now. I felt the words piling up inside, me words that I didn't know how to say, feelings that I didn't know how to express. Without a word, Lucas walked to his horse and mounted it with practiced ease. I stood there, frozen, the cold air biting at my skin, but the chill in my chest was worse. My heart pounded, and I didn't know why. I stepped forward, reaching out to the reins of the horse nearest me. The baby, still asleep, was oblivious to everything. "You don't have to go," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. Lucas turned to me, his eyes searching mine for a moment, as if trying to decide something. His gaze softened for a second, but then it hardened again, and he shook his head. "I have to," he replied simply. There was nothing more to say. There were no promises left to make, no words that could fill the space between us. And then, just as quickly as he had come into my life, he rode away, disappearing into the mist of the morning. The sound of the horse's hooves grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the wind. I stood there, watching the empty trail, feeling the weight of his absence already settling in my bones. I didn't know what the future held for me. I didn't know if I was ready for whatever was next. But I knew one thing: things had changed. They had changed in ways I couldn't explain, but the quiet truth was clear. I was no longer the same person who had been auctioned off, abandoned, and sold to the highest bidder. I had found something in this small cabin, in the quiet moments with Lucas, something I had lost long ago. Hope, the kind of hope that wasn't about surviving, it was about living. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just waiting to be rescued. I was ready to walk on my own. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the cabin. My journey wasn't over, not yet.